What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It happened at one of Manhattan's most exclusive charity events, where a single table costs $50,000 and compassion is as rare as humility. A line was crossed that winter night. We'll take you inside the Lexington Heights Grand Ballroom, where a narcissistic millionaire couple, Paul and Carol Taylor, drunk on entitlement and their own reflection, publicly tried to destroy a young woman in a wheelchair with a $5,000 dare. They thought their money could buy them a moment of sadistic entertainment. They were catastrophically wrong. What they didn't know was that they weren't just daring a server to humiliate herself. They were challenging a legend the world had forgotten. Stick with us for a story of cruel mockery, breathtaking artistry, and the moment one woman transformed her spotlight of shame into a stage of revolution. Before we begin, click subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. The air in the Lexington Heights Grand Ballroom was thick with the scent of wealth and performance. It was an intoxicating atmosphere, a collision of Tom Ford cologne, Chanel No. 5, and the faint powdery sweetness of 10,000 white roses imported from Ecuador specifically for tonight. For the guests draped in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, it was the smell of another Tuesday. For Jennifer Dean, it was the smell of survival, another shift navigating a world that had once worshipped her and now barely saw her at all. Jennifer, Jenny to the few event coordinators who bothered to learn her name, moved through the glittering chaos with the kind of grace that couldn't be erased by circumstance. Her wheelchair glided across the polished marble floor with a practiced fluidity. Her tray of champagne flutes balanced perfectly across her lap. Her black server's uniform was crisp and impeccable, a stark contrast to the shimmering silks, sequined gowns, and dripping jewelry of the women she served. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun, her posture impossibly straight, despite sitting, her expression carefully neutral. That was the job, to be an efficient, nearly invisible presence who materialized with drinks and disappeared before anyone had to acknowledge her existence beyond a dismissive nod. Tonight was the annual Lexington Heights Winter Benefit, an event where New York's wealthiest gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity by writing checks they'd never miss and bidding on vacations they'd never take. Jennifer had worked dozens of these galas over the past 3 years. She knew the rhythm intimately, the polite conversation that would devolve into bragging as the alcohol flowed, the air kisses exchanged between women who despised each other, the strained laughter that never reached eyes, stretched tight by procedure and pride. She rolled past a woman wearing what appeared to be a $250,000 emerald necklace, its green fire catching the light from the dozen crystal chandeliers suspended overhead like frozen constellations. The woman was laughing, a sharp, performative sound, at something a silver-haired man in a navy tuxedo had said. Neither of them glanced down as Jennifer refilled their glasses. She had learned not to expect acknowledgement. In rooms like this, people in wheelchairs existed in a strange quantum state, simultaneously too visible and completely invisible. Guests would stare when she first rolled past, their eyes skating over her chair with a mixture of pity and discomfort, then immediately look away as if she'd vanished. It was a particular kind of erasure, one Jennifer had become expert at navigating. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Jennifer Dean had once commanded stages like this. Not as background, not as help, as a star. Before the accident that shattered her spine and her world, Jennifer had been one of New York City Ballet's most promising young dancers. Critics had called her luminous, a once-in-a-generation talent. Poetry in motion. She'd performed principal roles by 22. She'd been offered contracts with companies in Paris, London, Moscow. And then, one rainy October night, a drunk driver ran a red light. Everything stopped. The ballet world moved on without her as efficiently as the wealthy guests now moved past her wheelchair. Companies stopped calling within weeks. Sponsorships evaporated. The mentors who had once called her extraordinary began treating her like a cautionary tale. Within 6 months, Jennifer Dean had become a name people vaguely remembered, but no longer mentioned. So she rebuilt her life in the margins of the world she'd lost. Working events like this, where she could at least be near music, near beauty, near the echo of what she'd once been. She rolled toward the bar to reload her tray, her wheels making the softest whisper against marble that probably cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. The orchestra was setting up on the raised stage at the far end of the ballroom, musicians adjusting music stands and tuning instruments. The sound made something in Jennifer's chest tighten. She looked away. That's when she saw them. Paul and Carol Taylor sat at table 1, the power position closest to the stage, positioned so everyone in the room had to acknowledge their presence. Paul lounged in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in his life. His white dinner jacket custom tailored to emphasize his broad shoulders. His dark hair was swept back with too much product, his smile sharp and self-satisfied. He was gesturing broadly, holding court, clearly telling a story he found hilarious. Beside him, Carol Taylor sat with the rigid posture of someone perpetually posing for a photograph that might never be taken. Her red sequined gown caught every light in the room, designed to demand attention, and her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over one bare shoulder. Her arms were crossed in a way that suggested judgment was her resting state. Her lips curved in a smile that looked more like a threat. They were Manhattan royalty of the most toxic kind. Tech money, married to old real estate wealth, combined into a couple whose primary hobby was reminding everyone else of their own superiority. Jennifer had served them before. She knew what was coming. As she rolled closer with fresh champagne, Paul's eyes landed on her. His expression shifted, amusement flickering across his face like someone who'd just spotted an opportunity for entertainment. He elbowed Carol, nodding in Jennifer's direction. And just like that, Jennifer knew. Tonight was going to be different. Tonight, something was going to break. Jennifer hadn't always been invisible. There was a time, not so long ago, that she'd forgotten the feeling, when every eye in a room followed her movement, like she was magnetic north. When she'd walk into the New York City Ballet studios on West 63rd Street at dawn, her dance bag slung over one shoulder, and even the principal dancers would pause to watch her warm up at the bar. She'd started ballet at 4 years old in a cramped studio in Queens, where her mother had scraped together tuition by working double shifts at a diner. By 8, Jennifer was dancing en pointe. By 12, she'd been accepted into the School of American Ballet on full scholarship. By 16, critics were calling her a prodigy. The training had been brutal. 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. Bleeding toes wrapped in tape and lamb's wool. Muscles screaming through grand allegros. The constant pressure to be thinner, lighter, more ethereal, to disappear while simultaneously commanding every eye in the theater. Jennifer had absorbed it all with the focused intensity of someone who knew she was born for this, whose body spoke a language more honest than words ever could. Her instructors had whispered about her potential in reverent tones. Once in a generation, they'd said. Possibly once in a lifetime. By 22, she was dancing principal roles with New York City Ballet, Odette in Swan Lake, the Sugar Plum Fairy in The Nutcracker, Aurora in Sleeping Beauty. International companies had begun courting her. Paris Opera Ballet, the Royal Ballet in London, the Bolshoi in Moscow. Her future had stretched before her like an infinite stage, brilliant and certain. And then came October 15th. The rain had been coming down in sheets that night, the kind of downpour that turns Manhattan streets into rivers. Jennifer had just finished a performance of Giselle, her best one yet, the kind where you forget you're performing and simply become the character. She'd been floating on adrenaline and exhaustion, her costume bag slung over her shoulder as she waited for a cab outside Lincoln Center. She never saw the BMW run the red light. The impact threw her 15 feet She remembered the sound, a sickening crack that she later realized was her spine fracturing in 3 places. She remembered the cold of the wet pavement against her cheek. She remembered thinking, absurdly, that she needed to get up because she had rehearsal in the morning. She remembered trying to move her legs. And then nothing. When she woke up in the hospital 3 days later, the attending physician had delivered the news with clinical efficiency. T10 spinal cord injury. Complete. Paralyzed from the waist down. Permanently. The word permanently had echoed in her skull like the death knell it was. The ballet world had rallied around her at first. Cards, flowers, tearful visits from company members who promised she'd always be family. The artistic director had assured her they'd find her a place in administration, maybe teaching. But that support had an expiration date. Within 2 months, the visits stopped. Within 4 months, the administrative position had quietly gone to someone else. Within 6 months, her name had been removed from the company website entirely, as if she'd never existed. Sponsors who'd once fought over her dropped her without a phone call. Choreographers who'd created pieces specifically for her stopped returning emails. Jennifer Dean, the prodigy, the once-in-a-generation talent, had become an inconvenient reminder of how quickly dreams could shatter. So she'd done what survivors do. She'd rebuilt from fragments. The weight of that history sat in Jennifer's chest as she rolled toward table 1 with fresh champagne, Paul Taylor's calculating eyes tracking her approach like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey. She'd learned to recognize that look. The slight upturn of lips that preceded cruelty disguised as humor. The way people's postures shifted when they decided someone in a wheelchair might provide entertainment. Well, Carol Taylor's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife-scraping crystal. She turned in her seat to face Jennifer fully, her red sequined dress glittering with manufactured fire. Look who they've sent to serve us. Jennifer kept her expression neutral, practiced. Good evening, Mrs. Taylor. May I refill your glass? Carol's smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. Can you even reach the table properly from down there? She gestured vaguely at Jennifer's wheelchair, as if it were a prop she found distasteful. I manage quite well. Thank you. Jennifer's voice remained steady as she leaned forward to pour champagne into Carol's crystal flute. The motion was graceful, controlled. Years of ballet training translated into different movements, but no less precise. Paul leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms across the backs of adjacent seats in a territorial display. He was watching Jennifer with amused interest, the way someone might watch a circus act. Hey, do you have to, get special training for this? Serving from a wheelchair? He chuckled at his own question. I mean, it seems complicated. A woman at the neighboring table shifted uncomfortably. A man in a gray tuxedo suddenly became fascinated with his phone. Jennifer had heard variations of this question dozens of times. The false concern, the condescension wrapped in curiosity. I'm quite capable, Mr. Taylor. She moved to his glass, pouring with the same measured precision. I'm sure you are. It's just... Paul exchanged a look with Carol, a shared moment of cruel amusement. It must be so limiting, you know? I can't imagine not being able to just stand up, walk around, do normal things. The words landed like small, deliberate cuts. I do plenty of things, Jennifer said quietly. Oh, I'm sure you do, Carol interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Like this. Serving people. That's very admirable. Making the best of a bad situation. Paul lifted his champagne flute, examining the bubbles with exaggerated interest. What did you do before this? He gestured vaguely at her wheelchair. Were you always a server? Jennifer's fingers tightened on the champagne bottle. For a fraction of a second, she considered telling them. I was a principal dancer with New York City Ballet. I performed on stages you've only sat in the audience of. Critics wrote poetry about my movement, but she knew what would happen. They'd call it tragic. They'd pity her even more. They'd treat her former life like a ghost story, something dead and gone, proof that she was even more broken than they'd assumed. I've done various work, she said instead, her voice carefully empty of emotion. Various work, Paul repeated, smirking at Carol. How versatile. The orchestra began warming up in earnest now, the sound of violins and cellos tuning, creating that distinctive pre-performance chaos. The conductor tapped his baton against his music stand. And then the musicians launched into a few bars of a waltz. Soaring, powerful, heartbreakingly beautiful. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. She knew this piece. Tchaikovsky. Swan Lake, Act 2. She'd danced Odette to this exact music 17 times. Her body remembered before her mind caught up. The rising extension, the port de bras, the way you had to make your arms become wings while your legs carved impossible shapes through space. Paul noticed her reaction. His eyes lit up with fresh cruelty. Oh, he said slowly, a terrible smile spreading across his face. Oh, that's interesting. Do you like this music? Jennifer forced herself to breathe normally. It's beautiful. It is, isn't it? Paul leaned forward, his elbows on the table now, his full attention focused on her like a spotlight. It makes you want to dance, doesn't it? Carol giggled, a sharp, delighted sound. And Jennifer understood. In that crystalline moment of dread, exactly what was about to happen. Paul was reaching for something. His hand disappeared into his jacket pocket. When it emerged, he was holding a thick stack of $100 bills. The stack of bills in Paul Taylor's hand looked obscene under the chandelier light. Crisp hundreds fanned out like a deck of cards, each one representing more money than Jennifer made in a week of catering shifts. He held them up deliberately, making sure the gesture caught the attention of nearby tables. Heads began to turn. Conversations quieted. Paul Taylor thrived on attention the way plants thrived on sunlight, and he could feel the room's focus shifting toward him like a physical force. The orchestra, as if sensing the dramatic moment, transitioned from their warm-up into the opening measures of a full waltz. Not just any waltz, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, Act 2, the transformation scene. The violins soared, the cellos provided their deep, resonant heartbeat, and the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath as the music swelled. It was the kind of music that demanded movement, that made your body ache to respond. For Jennifer, it was torture and transcendence wrapped together. Every note a memory of who she'd been, every phrase a reminder of what she'd lost. Paul's smile widened as he watched her face. He'd seen something flicker there. Pain, maybe, or longing. And like any predator, he'd recognized vulnerability. Carol, he said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. I just had the most wonderful idea. Carol leaned in, her red sequined dress catching the light. Her expression already primed for whatever entertainment her husband was about to provide. Oh? Do tell, darling. Paul stood up, the movement drawing even more attention. He was tall, commanding, the kind of man who'd never been denied anything in his life. He held the stack of money higher, almost like a trophy. This music, he announced, his voice carrying across the nearby tables with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard, is absolutely magnificent. It makes you want to move, doesn't it? To dance. A few guests nodded politely, uncertain where this was going. Paul turned his attention fully to Jennifer, his eyes glittering with malicious amusement. You know what would be entertaining? If our server here gave us a little performance. He gestured at her with the money, the bills fluttering slightly. I'm a generous man. I believe in incentivizing excellence. Jennifer's stomach dropped. Around them she could feel the shift in the room's energy. Some guests leaning forward with interest, others already looking uncomfortable. sensing the cruelty about to unfold. "Paul," Carol purred, touching his arm with a perfectly manicured hand. "What are you proposing?" He was fully committed now, feeding off the attention, drunk on his own audacity and the 3 glasses of champagne he'd already consumed. "I'm proposing a dare. A challenge, if you will." He looked directly at Jennifer, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Dance for us. Right here, right now, to this beautiful music. Give us a real performance." The words hung in the air like poison. Someone at a nearby table gasped softly. Paul continued, his voice growing louder. "More theatrical. And if you can actually do it, if you can manage to dance despite your situation, this $5,000 is yours." He waved the stack of bills like a flag. $5,000 for one dance. That's more than you make in, what, 2 months of serving drinks? Jennifer's hands had gone numb on her wheelchair's armrests. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears, nearly drowning out the soaring violins. Carol's laughter cut through the tension, high, delighted, cruel. "Oh, Paul, you're terrible!" But her eyes were bright with anticipation. "She can't possibly. How would she even—" She gestured vaguely at Jennifer's wheelchair, her meaning crystal clear. "That's what makes it interesting," Paul said, his grin widening. He was playing to the room now, and he knew it. Some guests were laughing nervously. Others had the decency to look away, suddenly fascinated by their champagne glasses or the flower arrangements. But plenty were watching, waiting. Some with horrified expressions, others with the guilty fascination of people watching a car crash they couldn't look away from. A man in a gray tuxedo at table 3 whispered something to his wife, who shook her head in disapproval. But they both kept watching. A woman dripping in diamonds covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. The conductor, sensing something wrong, had slowed the tempo slightly, the waltz continuing, but softer now, as if the musicians themselves were uncertain whether to stop. Jennifer sat frozen, every muscle in her body locked. This wasn't just humiliation. This was annihilation. Paul Taylor was offering her money to perform the one thing she couldn't do anymore. The one thing that had defined her entire existence before the accident shattered everything. Dance. He was asking her to dance, in front of hundreds of Manhattan's elite, in her wheelchair, for their entertainment. For money waved in her face like she was a circus animal being offered a treat. "Well," Paul pressed, his voice sharp now, "it's a generous offer. $5,000 for 2 minutes of work. You'd be crazy to refuse." He paused, then added with calculated cruelty, "Unless you can't do it. Unless you're really that limited." "Paul, stop!" A woman's voice came from 2 tables over. Quiet, uncomfortable, but not quite loud enough to carry real authority. He ignored her completely. Carol stood up now too, adjusting her dress, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Come on," she coaxed in a voice dripping with false encouragement. "It could be fun. We're all friends here. Entertainment for charity, right?" She laughed at her own joke. Jennifer's throat had closed. She wanted to leave, to wheel away with whatever dignity she could salvage. But her body wouldn't respond. She was trapped in this moment, pinned by the weight of hundreds of eyes, by the soaring music that was cutting through her like knives, by the stack of money being waved in her face like a weapon. She started, her voice barely audible. "Speak up," Paul commanded, cupping his ear in an exaggerated gesture. "I can't," Jennifer whispered. "Can't?" Paul's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "You mean won't? There's a difference." He turned to address the room. "She won't even try. Ladies and gentlemen, $5,000 on the table, and she won't even make an effort." Then his expression hardened, the playful mask slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. "Here's the thing," he said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. He leaned down, bringing his face closer to Jennifer's level, the money still clutched in his hand. "I'm friends with the event coordinator. very good friends. And if you refuse this very generous offer, if you embarrass me by making me look like the bad guy here, I'll make sure you never work another event in this city again." The threat landed like a physical blow. "Paul," the same woman's voice from before, louder now. But he was locked in now, committed to the performance of power. "Your choice. Dance. Take the money. Everyone has a good time. Or refuse. And you're fired. Simple as that." The waltz reached its crescendo, the strings climbing to impossible heights, the music demanding movement, demanding flight, demanding everything Jennifer could no longer give. She looked at the money in his hand. She looked at his face, smug, entitled, absolutely certain of his victory. She looked at Carol's expression, delighted anticipation of someone else's humiliation. She looked at the room full of guests, some laughing, some looking away in shame, some frozen with horrified fascination. And something inside Jennifer Dean, something that had been battered and broken but never quite destroyed, began to crystallize into something harder than diamond. This man thought he could buy her humiliation. He thought her wheelchair made her helpless. He thought he'd already won. But Paul Taylor had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He didn't know who he was talking to. He didn't know what she'd survived. And he had absolutely no idea what she was capable of. Jennifer's hands tightened on her armrests. Her spine straightened. The posture of a dancer returning. Muscle memory older than trauma. Her chin lifted with the grace of someone who'd commanded stages when Paul Taylor was still asking Daddy for allowance money. The fear in her chest transmuted into something else entirely. Something fierce. Something burning. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady, carrying across the silent ballroom with perfect projection, a skill learned from years of performing. "I accept." The two words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Even the orchestra seemed to hesitate, the waltz continuing, but softer, as if the musicians themselves were holding their breath. Paul Taylor's smile froze on his face. That smug, self-satisfied expression, suddenly uncertain around the edges. He'd expected tears, maybe, or a desperate refusal followed by humiliation. He'd expected to win the way he always won, with money and cruelty, and the absolute certainty that people like Jennifer Dean had no power against people like him. He hadn't expected acceptance. Carol's laughter died in her throat, her red sequined dress suddenly seeming too bright, too much. Her hand, which had been resting on Paul's arm in amused support, dropped to her side. "You—" Paul started, then stopped, cleared his throat. "You accept?" Jennifer didn't respond. Not with words. Instead, she released her grip on the wheelchair's armrests and rolled backward, away from table 1, away from the Taylors' shocked expressions, away from the scattered champagne flutes, and the half-eaten appetizers, and the trappings of their toxic wealth. She rolled toward the center of the ballroom floor. A gasp rippled through the crowd, soft, collective, disbelieving. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman in a silver gown grabbed her husband's arm. A man in a tuxedo set down his champagne glass with a soft clink that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. The open floor stretched before Jennifer like an ocean, polished marble reflecting the crystal chandeliers overhead, vast and terrifying and perfect. This was the space where the evening's scheduled entertainment would have performed later, where a professional dance company had been meant to showcase carefully choreographed pieces for the enjoyment of donors. Jennifer positioned herself at the exact center, her movements deliberate and precise. She performed on stages around the world. Lincoln Center, the Paris Opera House, the Royal Opera House in London. But none of them had felt quite like this. Those performances had been art. This was survival disguised as art. This was war fought with choreography. She took a breath, let it out slowly. The way she'd been taught 15 years ago by her first ballet instructor, a former principal dancer from the Bolshoi, who'd insisted that breath was the foundation of everything. Behind her, Paul had recovered enough to speak. "This should be interesting," he announced to the room, trying to reclaim his authority. His voice carrying that forced joviality of someone who just realized they might have miscalculated. "Let's see what she can do." A few nervous laughs scattered through the crowd, but most people were silent, watching with a mixture of horror and fascination, and something else. A desperate hope, perhaps, that somehow this wouldn't be the disaster it seemed destined to become. Jennifer ignored them all. She closed her eyes for just a moment, her hands resting lightly on her wheels, her posture impossibly straight. Years of training, decades of muscle memory, flooded through her body like electricity. Her spine lengthened, her shoulders settled into perfect alignment. Her chin lifted with the grace of someone who'd spent half her life learning to make her body into poetry. When she opened her eyes, something had shifted in her expression. The uncertainty was gone. The mortification had burned away. What remained was focus, pure, crystalline, absolute. She was no longer Jennifer Dean, the server. She was Jennifer Dean, principal dancer, and she was about to remind everyone, including herself, exactly what that meant. The chandelier directly above her seemed to intensify its light, as if the universe itself were providing a spotlight. The crystals caught and scattered the glow, creating a halo effect that turned the marble floor beneath her into something luminous, something magical. Jennifer raised her right hand, slowly, deliberately. The movement was so precise, it could have been measured with a ruler, arm extending through second position, then rising through third. Her fingers articulated with the kind of detail that took years to master. Port de bras, the carriage of the arms. One of the first things you learned in ballet, and one of the last things you perfected. Her left arm followed, creating a perfect frame above her head, forming a position that would have made her first ballet teacher weep with pride. The crowd leaned forward collectively. At table 1, Carol gripped Paul's sleeve. "Paul," she whispered urgently. "Paul, maybe we should—" "Shh," he hissed, but his voice had lost its confidence. His face had gone slightly pale. Jennifer lowered her arms in a graceful sweep, her torso bending forward with the fluid control of someone who understood exactly how to use breath and core strength to create shapes that seemed to defy physics. Her head tilted, her neck extending in a long, elegant line. She was warming up. Right there, in front of everyone, she was preparing to perform the way she'd prepared for hundreds of shows. Methodically, professionally, with the kind of discipline that separated amateurs from artists. The orchestra, sensing something extraordinary about to happen, began to swell. The conductor, a middle-aged man with silver hair, who'd been watching with growing amazement, made a subtle gesture to his musicians. The tempo steadied. The volume increased. The waltz transformed from background music into a force of nature. The strings climbing, the brass adding weight, the percussion providing heartbeat. Jennifer's breathing synced with the music. Her chest rose and fell in rhythm with the violins. Her fingers flexed and released, preparing, awakening. Around the ballroom, people had stopped pretending to do anything else. Silverware rested on plates. Champagne glasses sat forgotten. Conversations had evaporated entirely. 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest, most jaded socialites were watching a woman in a wheelchair prepare to dance, and not one of them could look away. A waiter near the kitchen entrance had pulled out his phone, angling it to capture the scene. He wasn't the only one. At table 7, a woman in a sapphire gown had her phone up, recording. At table 12, a man had discreetly positioned his device to capture everything. Jennifer didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't care. She placed her hands on her wheels, her grip confident and sure. The rubber beneath her palms was warm from the ballroom heat, textured, familiar. These wheels had carried her through 3 years of rebuilding her life. Now they were about to become something else entirely, an instrument, an extension of her artistry, a weapon against everyone who'd ever underestimated her. The waltz reached a transitional phrase, a moment where the music gathered itself before launching into its main theme. The violins trembled on a sustained note, building tension, building anticipation, the sound stretching like a wire-pulled taut. Jennifer's muscles coiled, her core engaged, every fiber of her being focused into a single point of absolute intention. The chandelier light seemed to pulse in time with the music. The ballroom held its breath. Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Paul's money sat forgotten on the table behind him, the bills scattered and meaningless. Conductor's baton hung suspended in midair, frozen at the peak of its arc. And then the waltz exploded into its full glory, the orchestra unleashing the main theme with breathtaking force, the music cascading through the ballroom like light, like water, like everything beautiful and powerful and true. Jennifer's hands gripped her wheels, her arms tensed, her eyes blazed with something beyond determination, beyond defiance, something transcendent and fierce and absolutely unstoppable. She moved, and the entire world shifted on its axis. The first spin was impossibly fast. Jennifer's hands drove the wheels in opposite directions with explosive force, and her chair whipped around in a complete rotation. Once, twice, 3 times, the momentum creating a blur of white fabric and gleaming chrome. Her arms extended outward in perfect alignment, forming the classical ballet position that should have been impossible from a seated position, but somehow wasn't. The movement was so sudden, so fierce, so utterly unexpected that several people gasped out loud. She stopped on a dime, the chair perfectly still, her arms now overhead in a flawless 5th position. Her torso arched backward in a breathtaking cambray, her spine bending with the kind of flexibility that takes decades to develop, her head tilted back so that her face caught the chandelier light. For 3 heartbeats, she held the position. Then she launched into motion again. This time she moved forward with gathering speed, her wheels eating up the polished marble floor. But this wasn't just rolling. This was choreography. Her upper body twisted and flowed in counterpoint to the chair's movement, creating shapes that seemed to exist in 2 dimensions simultaneously. Her arms swept through port de bras sequences that any ballet company would recognize, but transformed, adapted, reinvented for her new reality. The orchestra followed her like they'd rehearsed together for months, the conductor's baton tracing her movements in the air, the music swelling and retreating in perfect synchronization with her performance. Jennifer spun again, a pirouette that would have been impossible for most able-bodied dancers to execute with such precision. The chair became an extension of her technique rather than a limitation of it. She controlled the rotation with micro-adjustments of her hands, slowing at the perfect moment to extend her arms in a dramatic flourish that made the entire ballroom seem to tilt. A woman at table 4 began crying silently, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her chest. Jennifer transitioned into a sequence that defied every assumption about wheelchair movement. She tilted the chair onto its rear wheels, balancing with the kind of core strength that spoke to hours of training, years of discipline. In this elevated position, she executed a series of arm movements that created the illusion of flight, wings unfolding, rising, reaching toward the chandeliers. The visual was stunning, impossible, perfect. She let the chair drop back to all 4 wheels with a controlled precision that would have shattered bone if executed incorrectly, then immediately launched into rapid, intricate figure-8 patterns across the floor. Her chair carved graceful arcs into invisible space, each curve a sentence in a language of movement, each turn a declaration. I am not broken. I am extraordinary. I am still everything I ever was. Paul Taylor stood frozen at his table, the stack of money clutched so tightly in his hand that his knuckles had gone white. His mouth was slightly open, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. He tried to school his features into something dismissive, forcing out a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate even to his own ears. Well, it's interesting, I suppose, he muttered to no one in particular. But his eyes betrayed him, wide, shocked, unable to look away. Carol hadn't moved in nearly 30 seconds. She stood beside the table like a statue carved from sequins and regret, her earlier smirk completely erased. Her hand had risen to her throat in an unconscious gesture of shock, her perfectly manicured fingers pressing against her pearl necklace. Jennifer wasn't finished. She executed a sequence that looked like it had been lifted straight from classical ballet repertoire, but transformed into something entirely new. Rising onto the rear wheels again, she extended one arm in a high fifth position, while the other swept down in a graceful arc, creating the arabesque line that every ballerina spends years perfecting. Her torso twisted, her shoulders squared, her head tilted with the exact angle that separated good technique from transcendent artistry. The chair spun beneath her in a slow, controlled rotation. A promenade en arabesque, reinvented. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, someone began clapping, then stopped abruptly, as if afraid to break the spell. The music built toward its climax, the violins screaming toward impossible heights, the cellos providing thunderous foundation, the entire orchestra playing with the kind of passion usually reserved for opening nights at major venues. Jennifer responded with a final sequence that would be remembered for years to come. She launched herself across the floor with breathtaking speed, her wheels humming against marble, then executed a series of rapid spins, 1, 2, 3, 4, each rotation faster than the last, her arms creating shapes that blurred together into pure artistic expression. She transitioned between positions with such fluidity that it was impossible to see where one movement ended and another began. Classical ballet technique, decades of it, merged with contemporary innovation, with adaptive choreography, with pure, raw brilliance. She was demonstrating what should have been obvious all along. Disability didn't diminish artistry. It transformed it, expanded it, created new possibilities that able-bodied dancers couldn't even conceive of. For the finale, Jennifer executed a movement that made the entire ballroom gasp in unison. She lifted herself partially out of the chair using only the strength of her arms, suspending her body in midair while the chair rolled beneath her, creating a moment of levitation that seemed to defy physics itself. Her legs, though paralyzed, were positioned with the same care and precision as every other part of her body. Extended, elegant, part of the complete picture. Her arms spread wide in a final, triumphant position as the music crashed into its ultimate crescendo. The orchestra held the final note, violins sustaining, brass swelling, percussion providing one last dramatic punctuation. And Jennifer held her pose. Her chair came to a complete stop at the exact center of the ballroom, in the exact spot where she'd begun. Her arms were extended like wings, her head tilted back, her face radiant with exertion and triumph and something beyond both, pure, undeniable truth. Her chest heaved with controlled breathing. A single bead of sweat rolled down her temple, catching the chandelier light like a diamond. The music faded. Silence fell. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The silence stretched and expanded, filling every corner of the vast ballroom, pressing against the crystal chandeliers, wrapping around the frozen guests who stood transfixed by what they'd just witnessed. 4 seconds. Jennifer held her pose, her body trembling with the effort of maintaining perfect stillness. After such explosive movement, every muscle engaged, every line of her body still telling the story she'd just performed. 5 seconds of complete, trembling, breathless stillness. And then, the ballroom exploded. 300 people rose to their feet as one, a wall of bodies standing in stunned reverence. The applause started like thunder, sudden, massive, overwhelming. It built and built, crashing against the walls, reflecting off the marble floor, rising toward the chandeliers. People were screaming, crying, clapping so hard their palms had to be stinging. "Oh my God!" someone shouted. "Incredible!" another voice called out. The woman who'd been crying at table 4 was on her feet, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. The man beside her was applauding with his arms raised above his head, his face transformed with awe. At table 7, a distinguished-looking woman in her 70s, a former principal dancer herself, who'd performed at Lincoln Center in the 1970s, was weeping openly, clapping through her tears. The waiters had abandoned all pretense of professionalism. They stood along the walls applauding, some with tears in their eyes, others grinning with fierce pride, as if Jennifer were family. The orchestra musicians were on their feet, too, tapping their bows against music stands in the traditional gesture of respect that performers reserved for truly transcendent artistry. The conductor was applauding so enthusiastically that his baton had fallen to the floor, forgotten, and in the center of it all, bathed in chandelier light and the thunderous love of 300 strangers who just witnessed something they'd never forget. Jennifer Dean finally lowered her arms. She was shaking, exhausted, vindicated, and absolutely, utterly unstoppable. The applause continued to thunder through the ballroom, wave after wave of sound that seemed to have no end. Jennifer sat in the center of the floor, her chest still heaving from exertion, her skin gleaming with sweat that caught the chandelier light like diamonds. She allowed herself one moment, just one, to close her eyes and let the sound wash over her. This was what she'd lost. This was what she'd missed. Not the applause itself, but what it represented. Recognition, respect, the acknowledgement that she was seen, truly seen, for what she could do rather than what she couldn't. When she opened her eyes, she found herself looking directly at table 1, at Paul Taylor. His face had gone from pale to flushed, a deep red creeping up his neck and spreading across his cheeks like a rash. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles jumped beneath his skin. The stack of money was still clutched in his hand, but now the bills were crumpled, crushed by his white-knuckled grip. The applause around him must have felt like mockery, like judgment, like the entire ballroom was choosing her over him, validating her instead of him, celebrating someone he'd tried to destroy. His humiliation was complete, public, and irreversible, and he couldn't stand it. Enough! Paul's voice cracked through the applause like a whip. He wasn't shouting, exactly. His voice was too strained for that, too tight. But it carried. Enough! The clapping faltered, then died in scattered pockets across the room. Heads turned towards table 1. The mood shifted instantly, the celebration curdling into uncertainty. Paul stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward with a harsh sound against the marble. Carol reached for his arm, her fingers catching the sleeve of his white dinner jacket. "Paul, darling, maybe we should—" He shook her off without looking at her. The ballroom had gone silent again, but the silence was different from the one before Jennifer's performance. This one was tense, dangerous. 300 people watched as Paul Taylor's carefully constructed facade cracked wide open. He looked at the money in his hand, $5,000 that suddenly meant nothing, that had transformed from a weapon of humiliation into evidence of his own cruelty. His hand trembled with rage. "You want your money?" His voice was venomous, shaking. "You want your payment for that ridiculous—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. The words died in his throat, because everyone in the room knew the truth. What they just witnessed wasn't ridiculous. It was magnificent. And Paul Taylor's opinion couldn't change that. So he did the only thing his ego would allow. He threw the money. The stack of bills exploded from his hand in a violent arc, separating mid-flight into a shower of hundreds that tumbled and spun through the air like cruel confetti. They landed around Jennifer's wheelchair in a scattered mess, some on the floor, some catching on her dress, one landing on her lap. The sound of the bills hitting marble echoed in the silent ballroom, There! Paul spat, his face twisted with childish rage. Take your charity. That's what this was, right? A charity case performing for charity. How fitting. Paul. Carol's voice was urgent now, embarrassed. She grabbed his arm again, trying to pull him back toward his seat. Stop it. People are watching. Let them watch. He turned on her, his eyes wild. She made a fool of me. You made a fool of yourself, someone muttered from a nearby table. A man's voice, quiet, but clear enough to carry. A few scattered laughs rippled through the crowd, quickly suppressed. Carol's face had gone crimson, her earlier smugness replaced by mortification. She was trying to smile, trying to play it off as if her husband's public tantrum was somehow acceptable, but her hands were shaking. He's had too much champagne, she offered weakly to the nearest guests. The evening's been so exciting. We're all just... But no one was buying it. The sympathetic looks that occasionally came their way were few and far between. Most guests had turned their attention back to Jennifer, concern and admiration written across their faces. Jennifer sat perfectly still in the center of the scattered money, her posture unchanged from her final pose. She looked at the bills on the floor around her, some crumpled, some flat, all utterly meaningless. She looked at Paul, still trembling with impotent rage at his table. She looked at Carol, desperately trying to salvage what couldn't be saved. And then Jennifer rolled forward. Her wheels passed over several $100 bills without pause. The money rustled beneath her chair like dried leaves, ignored, irrelevant. She moved with the same grace she'd demonstrated during her performance. Controlled, deliberate, powerful. She stopped directly in front of table 1, close enough that Paul had to look down to meet her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but absolutely clear, carrying across the silent ballroom with perfect projection. I didn't dance for you. The words landed like stones in still water. Paul's mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. Jennifer continued, her gaze steady and unflinching. I didn't dance for your money. I didn't dance for your entertainment. I didn't dance to prove anything to you. She paused, letting each word sink in. I danced because I never stopped being a dancer. Carol made a small, strangled sound. You thought your dare could humiliate me, Jennifer said. You thought you could buy my dignity with $5,000. You thought my wheelchair made me less than you. Her voice remained calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath, tempered by years of survival, sharpened by this moment of truth. You were wrong about all of it. She rolled backward slightly, putting distance between them. Keep your money, Mr. Taylor. You need it more than I do. She glanced at the bills scattered on the floor. You'll need something to remind you of the night you tried to break someone and discovered she was already unbreakable. The ballroom was so silent that Jennifer could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the soft rustle of someone's dress 3 tables away, could hear Carol's sharp intake of breath. Then Jennifer turned her wheelchair with fluid precision and began rolling toward the exit. The crowd parted for her like water, guests stepping aside to create a clear path. As she passed, people reached out, not to stop her, but to touch her hand, her shoulder, to murmur words of admiration and respect. That was beautiful. Thank you. You're incredible. Jennifer acknowledged them with small nods, gracious but moving with purpose. She wasn't fleeing. She was departing. There was a difference. Behind her, at table 1, Paul sank into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. Carol stood frozen beside him, her red dress suddenly looking garish under the chandelier light, her expression caught between fury and humiliation. Jennifer reached the ballroom's grand entrance and paused for just a moment. She looked back over her shoulder at the room full of Manhattan's elite, at the scattered money still lying on the floor, at the tailor's table, at the hundreds of faces watching her with respect she hadn't felt in 3 years. Then she rolled through the doorway and disappeared into the corridor beyond. The ballroom erupted into conversation the moment she was gone. Voices overlapping, stunned, excited, already turning the moment into a story they'd tell for years. But in the back corner, near the kitchen entrance, a young waiter named Marcus was staring at his phone with wide eyes. He'd recorded the entire thing, from the dare, to the performance, to Jennifer's devastating final words, and his thumb hovered over the upload button. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then made a decision. He opened his social media app, typed a caption with trembling fingers. Disabled ballerina, humiliated by millionaire couple. Watch what she does next. This happened tonight at the Lexington Heights Gala. Everyone needs to see this. He pressed upload. The video began processing. The progress bar crawled across his screen, and somewhere in the digital universe, something began to stir. Shares, comments, reactions spreading like wildfire, from phone to phone, screen to screen, consciousness to consciousness. By the time Marcus slipped his phone back into his pocket and returned to clearing tables, the video had already been viewed 300 times. By the time Jennifer made it to the parking garage and sat in her adapted van with tears finally streaming down her face, the video had been viewed 30,000 times. And by the time Paul and Carol Taylor returned to their penthouse apartment and began screaming at each other in their marble foyer, the video had been viewed 3 million times and was still climbing. The world was waking up, and Jennifer Dean's name was about to become unforgettable. Jennifer woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against her nightstand, a persistent, angry buzzing that pulled her from the first deep sleep she'd had in months. She cried herself to exhaustion in her van the night before, then driven home to her tiny studio apartment in Astoria and collapsed into bed still wearing her server's uniform. Her body ached from the performance, muscles she hadn't used in years screaming their protest. But underneath the pain was something else, a lightness she'd forgotten existed, the feeling of having reclaimed something precious that had been stolen. The phone continued its relentless buzzing. Jennifer reached for it groggily, expecting maybe a text from the catering company about her next shift, or perhaps a notification about an overdue bill, and what she found instead made her sit bolt upright in bed, suddenly, completely awake. Her phone screen was an avalanche of notifications. They were still coming in, dozens per second, the numbers climbing so fast they blurred. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails flooding her inbox. Social media notifications that had apparently broken through every privacy setting she'd ever configured. 498 new messages, 247 new emails, 834 mentions on social media platforms she barely used. Her hands shook as she opened the first text message. From an unknown number. You are incredible. I'm crying. Thank you for existing. Another. Just watched your video. My daughter has cerebral palsy, and you just showed her she can do anything. Thank you. Another. Jennifer Dean, you are a queen! Screw those entitled monsters. Her heart pounding, Jennifer opened her most used social media app. The first thing she saw was herself. Her face, frozen mid-performance, arms extended, expression fierce and beautiful, filled the screen. The video had been viewed 47 million times. 47 million. The number was so absurd she had to read it 3 times to believe it. Jennifer Dean was trending, worldwide. Number 1. Her fingers trembling, she pressed play on the video. There she was, at the center of the Lexington Heights ballroom. The video quality was surprisingly good. Marcus must have had a decent phone. The camera captured everything. Paul's cruel dare, the money waved in her face, the threat of firing, and then her quiet, devastating, I accept. The performance itself was breathtaking, even on a small screen. Jennifer watched herself spin and flow and create impossible beauty, and for a moment she forgot she was watching herself. She was just another viewer, mesmerized by what this woman in a wheelchair could do. Then came the ending. Paul throwing the money, her rolling past it, her words cutting through the silence. I didn't dance for you. The video ended with her rolling out of the ballroom, head high, while scattered bills lay forgotten on the marble floor. Jennifer's vision blurred with tears. The comment section was an endless scroll of support, anger, celebration, and solidarity. I've watched this 20 times and I'm still sobbing. That is what grace under pressure looks like. Paul and Carol Taylor are cancelled. Absolutely vile human beings. Former professional dancer here. Her technique is flawless. The way she adapted classical ballet for wheelchair is genius-level choreography. My son uses a wheelchair and this video just changed his life. Thank you, Jennifer Dean. Jennifer set the phone down with shaking hands and pressed her palms against her face. This couldn't be real. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible, serving drinks to people who looked through her. Now the entire world was watching her, defending her, celebrating her. Her phone rang, an actual call from a New York number she didn't recognize. She answered hesitantly. Hello? Jennifer Dean. The voice was professional, female, slightly breathless with excitement. This is Rebecca Choi from Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show tomorrow morning to talk about what happened at the gala. The segment would be... I need to think about it, Jennifer stammered. Of course, I'll send you an email with details. We're not the only ones calling, I'm sure, but we'd be honored to... 3 more calls came in while Rebecca was still talking. Jennifer ended the call politely and stared at her phone as it continued to ring and buzz and light up like a small sun in her hands. One email subject line caught her eye. Watching you was like watching dance be reborn. The sender, Laurent Beaumont, Jennifer's breath caught. Laurent Beaumont. The Laurent Beaumont, the French choreographer who'd revolutionized contemporary ballet, who'd worked with companies from Paris to Sydney, whose pieces were considered masterworks of modern dance. He'd won every major award in the industry. He was, quite simply, a legend. Her hands shook so badly she almost couldn't open the email. Miss Dean, I am writing to you from Paris, where I happened to see a video of your performance last night at 3 a.m. Insomnia and social media are strange bedfellows. I have watched it 14 times now. I cannot stop watching it. What you did was not merely impressive, it was revolutionary. You took a classical technique and transformed it into something entirely new while losing none of its essential beauty. In my 40 years of creating dance, I have rarely seen such pure artistry. I am currently developing a new contemporary ballet piece for New York City Ballet's spring season, and I would be deeply honored if you would consider collaborating with me. Not as inspiration, as a performer. I want to create a principal role specifically for you, incorporating your unique movement vocabulary. Please, call me at your earliest convenience. I know you must be overwhelmed today, but I wanted you to know the dance world has not forgotten you. We were simply waiting for you to remind us what we'd lost. With deepest admiration, Laurent Beaumont Jennifer read the email 3 times, then a 4th, each time expecting the words to change, to reveal themselves as some kind of cruel joke. But they remained stubbornly real. Laurent Beaumont wanted to work with her, wanted to create a role for her, wanted her to perform with New York City Ballet, the company that had erased her from their website 3 years ago. She set the phone down and laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. Her life had been quiet for so long. Invisible, manageable, safe. Now it was exploding in real time. Don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe now. If you don't, this could be the last story you catch from me. Across Manhattan, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Paul and Carol Taylor were experiencing a different kind of explosion. Turn it off! Carol shrieked, hurling a throw pillow at the television, where a morning news anchor was discussing the viral video everyone's talking about. Paul sat on their white leather sofa, his phone in his lap, his face ashen. His social media accounts, usually carefully curated showcases of wealth and success, had become war zones. The comments were brutal, relentless, creative in their cruelty. Hope that $5,000 was worth destroying your reputation forever. Imagine being so insecure you have to humiliate someone in a wheelchair. Pathetic. Jennifer Dean has more grace in her wheelchair than you'll have in your entire life. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Taylor Tech Industries. His company. He declined the call. It rang again immediately. A board member. He declined again. Carol paced the apartment like a caged animal, her designer robe trailing behind her. Her phone was ringing too. Had been since 6 a.m. Sponsors calling. Charity boards requesting she step down. Friends suddenly, mysteriously unavailable. This is insane! She spun to face Paul. One stupid video and our entire life is falling apart. It's not stupid, Paul said quietly, still staring at his phone. It's everywhere. CNN, BBC, every major platform. We're a trending topic in 30 countries. The doorbell rang. They looked at each other in alarm. Through the intercom came a woman's voice. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, I'm with the New York Times. I was hoping we could ask you a few questions about. Carol jabbed the intercom button to end the call. Press, she hissed. There's press in our building. Paul's phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. We need to discuss crisis management immediately. The damage is severe. Call me. Another text from the Taylor Foundation Board. Emergency meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. Your presence is mandatory. There are calls for your resignation. Another from his father. What the hell did you do? Carol collapsed onto the sofa beside him, her face in her hands. How did this happen so fast? Paul didn't answer. He was watching the news anchor introduce yet another clip from the gala, this time with commentary from a disability rights advocate who was calling their behavior a perfect example of ableist cruelty from the ultra-wealthy. The video played again. Jennifer's performance, her words, their humiliation broadcast to the entire world. We need to apologize, Carol said suddenly, a public statement, something heartfelt. It won't matter, Paul said. His voice was flat, defeated. They've already decided we're the villains. He was right. In the court of public opinion, the verdict had already been delivered. Your support keeps these emotional, powerful stories coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss this one. Back in Astoria, Jennifer's phone rang again. This time the caller ID read, New York City Ballet. Her heart stopped. She answered with a voice that didn't quite sound like her own. Hello? Ms. Dean, this is David Chen, Artistic Director of New York City Ballet. His voice was warm, professional, with an undercurrent of something that might have been shame. I'm calling because we saw your performance last night. Jennifer. What you did was extraordinary. Jennifer said nothing. Couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. I know we failed you, David continued quietly. When you needed us most, we disappeared. That was unconscionable, and I offer you my sincerest apologies. But I'm hoping. He paused. I'd like to invite you to meet with me and Laurent Beaumont this Friday. He's in town specifically to discuss a collaboration. And after seeing your performance, I want NYCB to be part of it. Jennifer closed her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. Miss Dean, are you there? Yes, she whispered. I'm here. Will you come, please? Through her tears, through the overwhelming flood of messages and calls and the entire world suddenly caring about her existence, Jennifer found her voice. Yes, she said. I'll come. And somewhere between that acceptance and the sunrise spilling golden light across her tiny apartment, Jennifer Dean understood. Her life would never be invisible again. The New York City Ballet studios on West 63rd Street looked exactly as Jennifer remembered. High ceilings, wall-to-wall mirrors, bars running the length of each room, morning light streaming through tall windows. But walking through those doors on Friday morning felt like stepping into a dream she'd been forcibly woken from 3 years ago. Her hands trembled on her wheelchair's armrests as she rolled down the familiar hallway, past rehearsal rooms where dancers stretched and warmed up. Some glanced at her with recognition. The viral video had made her face known to millions. A few smiled. One young core dancer pressed her hand to her heart and mouthed, "Thank you." Laurent Beaumont was waiting in Studio 5, the same room where Jennifer had rehearsed at Swan Lake 17 times. He was smaller than she'd imagined, barely 5'8", with silver hair swept back from an angular face and eyes that seemed to see through surfaces into essential truths. He wore all black, and when he saw her, his entire face transformed with a smile. "Mademoiselle Dean." His French accent was thick, warm. Finally, David Chen stood beside him, the artistic director who'd abandoned her 3 years ago and was now trying to make amends. His expression was cautious, respectful, carrying the weight of his guilt. "Jennifer," David said quietly. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, not quite ready to forgive him, but willing to be here. Laurent crossed the studio in quick strides and took both her hands in his. "I have watched your video perhaps 100 times now. Each time I see something new, a detail in your port de bras, the way you use momentum, how you've reinvented extension." His eyes shone with genuine excitement. "You are not adapting ballet to your wheelchair. You are creating something entirely new." Jennifer's throat tightened. "I don't know what I'm creating. I was just trying to survive." "All great art begins with survival," Laurent said simply. He gestured to the empty studio. "Would you show me? Not a performance, just movement. Let me see how you work." Jennifer's heart hammered. This was different from the gala. This was the studio where she'd trained for years, where every mirror reflected both who she'd been and who she'd become. This was sacred ground. But she rolled to the center of the floor. David moved to the sound system, his fingers hovering over the controls. "What music?" "Debussy," Jennifer said softly. "Clair de Lune." The music began, gentle, flowing, heartbreakingly beautiful. Jennifer closed her eyes, let the first notes wash over her, and began to move. This time there was no audience to impress, no cruelty to overcome. This was pure exploration. She let her arms float through the phrases, her torso bending and spiraling, her wheelchair becoming an instrument of expression rather than limitation. She executed slow, controlled turns, letting the music guide her, letting 3 years of grief and loss and survival pour out through movement. When she opened her eyes mid-phrase, Laurent was crying. He wasn't hiding it. Tears ran freely down his face as he watched her, one hand pressed to his mouth. Even David had turned away, his shoulders shaking. The music faded. Jennifer came to a gentle stop, her breathing steady, her body humming with the familiar exhaustion of real dancing. Laurent approached slowly, wiping his eyes unselfconsciously. "Forgive me, I am French. We are permitted to cry at beauty." He knelt beside her wheelchair so their eyes were level. "Jennifer, I want to create a piece for you. Not around you, for you. A principal role in my new work, Metamorphosis. It explores transformation, identity, the ways we rebuild ourselves after breaking." Jennifer's vision blurred. "Laurent, It will premiere at Lincoln Center in April. 6 months to create it together, to explore what your body can do, to push boundaries." His eyes were intense, sincere. "You will not be the disabled dancer we graciously include. You will be the star around whom the entire piece revolves." "Yes," the word came out as a sob. "Yes, I want that." Laurent smiled and squeezed her hands. "Then we begin Monday, 10 a.m. Bring your courage and your artistry. Leave your doubt at the door. The next 2 weeks became a rhythm Jennifer had forgotten existed. Wake early, commute to the studio, train for hours until her muscles screamed and her spirit soared. Laurent was a demanding collaborator, pushing her to try impossible things, celebrating when she achieved them, problem-solving when she couldn't. They worked on partnering with 2 other principals, figuring out lifts and balances that incorporated her wheelchair rather than worked around it. They explored dynamics no able-bodied choreographer would have conceived. Jennifer found herself creating movement vocabulary that didn't exist in any textbook, translating classical technique into entirely new forms. Some days she cried from frustration. Other days she cried from joy. Most days, both. She was dancing again, really dancing, not surviving through movement, but thriving in it. Her body grew stronger. Her artistry deepened. The reflection in the studio mirror showed someone she'd lost 3 years ago. Not the same person, but something perhaps better. Someone who understood that limitation could become innovation, that breaking could lead to transformation. Meanwhile, across town, Paul and Carol Taylor's world continued its spectacular collapse. Their publicist had crafted a carefully worded apology video. The Taylors sitting in their penthouse, dressed in casual clothes, meant to make them look humble, speaking with rehearsed regret about a lapse in judgment, and sincerely apologizing to Miss Dean. The internet shredded it within hours. This is the most insincere apology I've ever seen. They're reading off cue cards. Notice they never actually say they were wrong, just that they regret the situation. They're only sorry they got caught. Jennifer Dean deserves better than this garbage. The video's like-to-dislike ratio was catastrophic. Within 3 days, they deleted it. Carol tried a different approach, a tearful interview with a sympathetic morning show host, explaining how the video lacked context and how they'd actually been trying to encourage Jennifer. That attempt backfired even worse. A disability rights organization released a statement calling her comments insulting and delusional. The interview became a viral meme. Carol's fake tears transformed into countless jokes. Paul withdrew entirely, refusing all interviews. 3 board members at Taylor Tech resigned in protest. 2 major investors pulled funding. The Taylor Foundation lost 5 major sponsors. Their names, once synonymous with Manhattan power and influence, had become synonymous with cruelty and privilege unchecked. On a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the gala, Jennifer sat in Studio 5 after rehearsal, her body exhausted but satisfied. Laurent was choreographing a solo sequence for her, something that would open the second act, a moment of pure transformation. Try it again, he encouraged. This time, think of the moment you accepted Paul's dare, that shift from fear to power. Yes, Jennifer nodded, positioned herself, and began to move. As she spun and extended and created impossible beauty, she understood something fundamental. The gala hadn't been about defeating Paul and Carol Taylor. It had been about defeating the voice in her own head that said she was finished, that her dancing life had ended on a wet October night. She'd proved that voice wrong, and now, every day in the studio, she was proving it wrong again and again. The phoenix didn't rise from ashes just once. It rose every single morning, choosing flight over surrender, choosing transformation over death. Jennifer finished the sequence, breathing hard, smiling through tears of exhaustion and triumph. Laurent was beaming. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. And for the first time in 3 years, Jennifer Dean believed him. 6 weeks after the Lexington Heights Gala, Lincoln Center's David H. Koch Theater was sold out. Every seat filled, standing room packed. The lobby buzzing with an electric anticipation that even the ushers commented on. This felt different from a typical ballet premiere. This felt like witnessing history. Jennifer waited in the wings, her wheelchair positioned precisely at stage left. Her costume, a flowing dress that shifted from deep midnight blue to silver depending on the light, catching every ambient glow from the stage. Her heart hammered the way it always had before performances, that familiar cocktail of terror and exhilaration that every dancer knew intimately, but tonight felt different, bigger, more permanent. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see the audience settling in. The theater held 586 people, and every single one of them was here to see Metamorphosis, Laurent Beaumont's latest work, created specifically around her. In the front row sat her mother, who'd taken a week off from the diner to be here, tears already streaming down her face. Beside her, Marcus the waiter who'd filmed the original video, invited as Jennifer's personal guest. Several rows back, she spotted fellow wheelchair users, dancers with disabilities, people who told her in messages that her gala performance had changed their lives. And scattered throughout, carefully not seated together, were critics from every major publication. The New York Times, The Guardian, Dance Magazine, Le Monde. They'd come to see if the viral sensation could translate into legitimate artistry. Jennifer knew the answer. She'd lived it for 6 weeks in the studio with Laurent, creating something that had never existed before. The house lights dimmed. The audience hushed to immediate, electric silence. Laurent, conducting tonight himself, raised his baton. The orchestra, a full symphonic ensemble, lifted their instruments. The music began, strings building slowly, a single cello line that felt like a heartbeat, like breath, like waking up. Jennifer rolled onto the stage. The spotlight found her immediately, and the effect was transformative. Her silver costume caught the light, and seemed to glow from within. She moved to center stage with that same deliberate grace she demonstrated at the gala. But this time there was no cruelty to overcome, no dare to answer. This time there was only art. She began the opening sequence, the section Laurent had titled Breaking. Slow, controlled movements that spoke of pain, of loss, of a body learning its new limitations. Her arms extended in classical ballet lines, while her wheelchair remained still, creating a tension between movement and stillness, between what was and what is. Then came dissolving, rapid spins, and intricate floor patterns that showed the wheelchair not as limitation, but as possibility. She partnered with 2 principal dancers who lifted and supported her in ways that created impossible shapes, 3 bodies moving as one organism. The third section, Transformation, was the sequence they'd worked on that Tuesday morning, the moment of accepting power. Jennifer executed movements she'd created with Laurent, vocabulary that belonged to her alone, spins that built speed until she seemed to blur into pure light, extensions that redefined what ballet could be, a final lift where she suspended herself above the wheelchair, using only the strength of her arms, hovering in space like a bird learning it had wings all along. The music surged into its climax, everything building, the entire orchestra playing with the kind of passion usually reserved for requiems or revolutions. Jennifer finished in the same pose she'd ended with at the gala, arms spread wide, head tilted back, face radiant with effort and truth, and undeniable brilliance. The final note hung in the air. Silence. 1 second. 2. Then, the audience exploded. 2,500 people rose as one, the sound of their applause like thunder, like oceans. Like every beautiful thing in the world concentrated into pure sound. The ovation built and built, people screaming, crying, stamping their feet. "Brava!" someone shouted. "Jennifer!" Dozens of voices called. Laurent turned from the conductor's podium, tears streaming down his face, gesturing for her to take a bow. Jennifer wheeled forward to the edge of the stage, and the applause somehow intensified. Flowers began landing on the stage. Roses, lilies, entire bouquets thrown from the balconies. In the front row, her mother was sobbing openly, her hands pressed to her heart. The critics were on their feet too, several with tears on their faces, all of them clapping with the same abandon as everyone else. This wasn't polite appreciation. This was recognition of witnessing something unprecedented, the birth of an entirely new form of dance, the transformation of limitation into innovation, the proof that artistry transcends any body it inhabits. The ovation continued for 7 minutes. 7 full minutes of sustained thunder. When Jennifer finally rolled backstage, she was shaking, breathless, her face wet with sweat and tears, and something like joy so pure it felt almost painful. Laurent was waiting in the wings, and he pulled her into a fierce hug. "You did it. You magnificent creature. You did it." Other dancers crowded around, company members who'd partnered with her, who'd watched her transform the vocabulary of ballet itself. They were crying, laughing, touching her shoulders and hands with reverence. Through the chaos, Jennifer's phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out to find it flooded with notifications again, but different this time. Not viral shock, but artistic recognition. The New York Times critic had already posted, "Jennifer Dean doesn't adapt ballet to her wheelchair. She has reinvented what ballet can be. A transcendent, revolutionary performance." Dance Magazine. The most important premiere of the decade. Dean is a once-in-a-generation artist. Her name was trending again, but the conversation had shifted entirely. No longer the viral curiosity, the disabled dancer who'd clapped back at cruelty. Now she was Jennifer Dean, principal dancer. Jennifer Dean, innovator. Jennifer Dean, brilliant artist whose name belonged in the same conversations as Nureyev, Baryshnikov, Copeland. Across the city, in their penthouse apartment that now felt more like a prison, Paul and Carol Taylor sat in separate rooms, avoiding each other, avoiding the world. Paul's company had forced him out as CEO. The Taylor Foundation had dissolved entirely. Their social invitations had dried up completely. No galas, no benefits, no charity events. Manhattan society had closed its doors to them with the finality of a crypt being sealed. Carol scrolled through social media on her phone, reading about Jennifer's Lincoln Center triumph, seeing the rave reviews, the standing ovations, the absolute vindication. They'd tried to break her. Instead, they'd launched her into orbit while destroying themselves. The cruelty of it was almost poetic. Back at Lincoln Center, Jennifer finally found a quiet moment alone in her dressing room. She looked at herself in the mirror, at her face flushed with exertion. Her costume still shimmering, her eyes bright with tears and triumph. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, serving champagne in a ballroom, invisible to everyone around her. She thought about the accident 3 years ago that had seemed to end everything. She thought about every moment of pain and loss and rebuilding that had led to this night. And she understood. She had never actually been invisible. She'd been a star the entire time, burning bright and fierce in the darkness. They just hadn't known how to see her light. But now the whole world was watching, and she was just beginning to shine. Thanks for sticking with me till the end. If this story grabbed you, the next one will blow your mind. It's wilder, crazier, and full of twists you won't see coming. Don't miss it. Just click the video popping up on your screen right now and jump straight in.